Hello people, stick on this video if you're wanting to see Neil Oliver's Saturday monologue for 11th of February 2023. Just a quick word of what's been happening with that situation. So as you know, Mark Stein has been dispatched from GB News. I've done a video about it earlier in the week. There's been quite a bit on social media about it as well. But what's happened is basically it's not only GB News, it's more down to Ofcom really rather than GB News, and certainly not the presenters. What's happened? Ofcom have issued GB News basically. They've told them they've all had to go on sort of all the presenters and the news teams and that have had to go on sort of Ofcom training, as it were. Basically, what it is Ofcom is telling basically to get a TV broadcasting licence in the UK, you've got to abide by Ofcom's rules. If you do anything or broadcast anything that falls outside those rules, basically you in breach of your licence, you're at risk of losing your broadcasting licence in the UK. So that's basically what I said in the video a couple of days ago, that Mark Stein, they offered him a new contract at GB News, but if he came back on air and did the same type of material that he was doing before, he would be liable to a £40,000 fine. So that's why he's left. And he's got his own website. As I said, he's got his own website doing his own stuff. But Neil Oliver, who's on Saturday nights from 6 till 8, he's had a few complaints made against, not by GB News or Ofcom, but I think there was a report in the left-wing Guardian newspaper saying he was being anti-semitic in his report in his monologue last week, but it was nothing could be further from the truth. All he was talking about in last week's monologue, but if you've seen it, you know what I'm talking about. But he was talking about how much power the UK government got over its citizens, and talking about the powers of the Constitution and that type of thing, and also the power of juries and how juries can decide what goes and what doesn't go, this, that and the other. But anyway, so whether Neil will say anything about it in his monologue tonight, I don't know. So I'll leave it here with Neil Oliver's monologue for Saturday, 11th of February 2023.
The slow creep of ugliness into the language of public debate is impossible to ignore. It's a truly sad state of affairs, a degradation of the quality of discourse that should finally give us pause, make us stop and take a long hard look at the reality presently being forced upon us. But the fact is, we've grown accustomed to the knee-jerk application of lazy slurs and the smearing of reputations, to the casual abuse of those around us with some of the vilest accusations imaginable. Racist, sexist, misogynist, transphobe, anti-Semite. The list of tags is long, but just as the ceaseless printing of money has utterly devalued our currencies, so the machine gun spraying of labels, powerful labels once reserved for specific behaviours, deliberate crimes with malice aforethought, has rendered once lethally effective words all but meaningless. Even more worrying, the overuse and misuse of words distracts from real crime, real abuse, real discrimination. Real crimes of racism committed against people black, white and brown, for racism neither knows nor respects any colour bar, are lost in the haze whipped up by the ceaseless misuse of racist in relation to anything and everything. Sexist and misogynist are likewise bandied about with wild abandon, used almost without exception now for the purposes of silencing unwanted voices, frightening the faint-hearted back into their boxes. Real contempt for the female sex, made manifest, for example, in the coordinated wholesale rape of underage white working-class female children in towns up and down the country, abandoned to their fates by authority in its every guise, police, councils, judiciary, government, and entirely overlooked, blind eyes and deaf ears turned. The words that might rightly have been used to describe what was going on were made absent. Instead, all that greeted the news of all that evil and misery was state-sanctioned silence. Victims of the horror and those who knew about it and sought to raise the alarm and seek justice were shouted down. Those few actually brave enough to point fingers at the guilty were themselves labelled racists. That's the reality of where we end up when words are overused or misused. Paradoxically, real crime is left to thrive. Racist and misogynist are words with actual and precise meanings. Their use should sound alarm bells to alert us to real horror, real abuse, like that going on for decades in Rotherham, Telford, Oldham, and scores of other towns. That abuse of young girls has not stopped either, and won't stop while those who could and should be doing something about it find apathy and lack of meaningful concern and action less damaging to their career advancement and political ambition. More and more we live in a society in which keeping the head down or looking the other way feels to many like the only option, when to speak out, far less to do something, risks being carpet-bombed with the usual verbal abuse. Real misogyny is at the root too of the blatant and gratuitous misuse of transphobe as well. Men speaking up in support of women fighting to preserve the vital sanctity of women-only spaces, toilets and changing rooms, prisons, refugees and the rest, do not receive the full force of the transphobe label. In another example of misogyny, that insult, along with its even uglier twin, TERF, is applied most aggressively towards women. Transphobe, a word properly descriptive of aversion to and hatred of trans people, is therefore deliberately misused and ceaselessly and relentlessly, not to make easier the lives of trans people, but to shame, bully and dismiss women voicing concerns that only a handful of years ago would have been regarded as unquestionable common sense. All of this means real racists and misogynists can go about their brutal business almost unchallenged, while the once powerful and meaningful words, dread words, are pepper-sprayed into the faces of anyone and everyone seeking to ask questions of authority, to draw attention to dangerous societal misalignments, and to raise the alarm about overreach and mission creep. Verbal weaponry for use in emergency has been willfully and carelessly repurposed for one thing and one thing only, which is the silencing of debate. Most important to notice is the certainty that none of this is accidental, nor is it the product of a natural evolution of human behaviour. On the contrary, this choreographed and whipped-up name-calling, and let's face it, name-calling is what it truly is, deploying the oh-so-effective tactics of the school playground that none of us apparently outgrow, has been deliberately orchestrated and massively ramped up during the past 2 or 3 years of unprecedented change. It's been done on purpose, and the name-calling has been led and driven by government, by nudge units, and the rest of the little wizards tasked with the psychological manipulation and perversion of society. It really got going with anti-vaxxer, COVID-idiot, COVID denier and granny killer that became the round-the-clock stock in trade not just of government ministers, but most effectively in the mouths of familiar TV journalists and other media figures. As with racist, misogynist and transphobe, the panoply of pandemic epithets were the childishly effective bludgeon used to try and knock any and all dissent or downright disobedience on the head. As well as about silencing and controlling, it's been about division. Lockdowns and social distancing kept us physically apart, but even more sinister now is the way we're being set at each other's throats, fracturing and damaging the very fabric of society. Again, the ceaseless overuse of terms like anti-vaxxer rendered them utterly meaningless. People who had taken the products pushed as vaccines and been harmed by them, and then left in want of recognition, help and compensation, were routinely dismissed as anti-vaxxers, an allegation requiring exquisitely complex mental gymnastics in search of any sense whatsoever. Anyone questioning the claims as to the safety and effectiveness of those medical products is still automatically defamed as a COVID-idiot, or a granny killer, or a COVID denier. And yet, even though reams of peer-reviewed literature are out there now, making plain the reality of harm and risk from taking those products, still the C words are bandied about. And again, as with the rest of the name-calling, it's all about silencing dissenting voices and seizing and maintaining control of narratives. The ugliness and attempted bullying is everywhere. Perhaps the granddaddy of them all right now, the Swiss Army knife of insults, is right-wing. Everyone and everything standing in defiance of the narratives about COVID, about the war in Ukraine, the so-called climate crisis, 15-minute cities, is instantly and automatically right-wing. Real old-fashioned right-wingers must be revolving like revolutionaries in their graves at the butchery of a term that was once upon a time actually descriptive of a political position. Fearing the loss of cultural and community cohesion in the face of mass immigration is automatically right-wing, as well as racist, of course. Brexit is right-wing. Love of country is right-wing. Gardening is right-wing and also racist. So too the English countryside and being good at maths. After a lifetime of skirting around politics, avoiding the whole sordid business like something left behind on the pavement by a passing canine, I got out of bed one morning a couple of years ago to find I was right-wing too, apparently. Not just old-fashioned, stick-in-the-mud, middle-of-the-road right-wing, mind you, but frothing at the mouth, swivel-eyed, ultra-far-right right-wing. I achieved this feat by not moving at all in any direction. I've stayed where I've always been, which is to say in the land of those cynical of politics and politicians of all stripes, and therefore politically homeless for a lifetime, while some sort of undetected shifting of the tectonic plates moved the old world out from under my feet and off into the distance, never to return. Articles about me in the newspapers used to describe me as long-haired and Scottish. Nowadays, I'm mostly known to the mainstream media as right-wing conspiracy theorist Neil Oliver. It's laughable, but there we are. I said right-wing was the granddaddy, or at least the catch-all, but of course that would be to overlook the many megaton explosive power of the A word, which is anti-Semite. Arguably as ubiquitous as racist, anti-Semite has an edge of lethal sharpness. To be labelled anti-Semitic is to be allegedly guilty of one of the oldest and ugliest sins of all. Last week, a piece in The Guardian raised the spectre of anti-Semitism, political journalist Peter Walker nudging it as close to me as he dared after I spoke on this channel about the erosion of the 1,000-year-old British Constitution by one parliament after another. It was quite a leap, I can opine that much, but then you'd expect some convoluted reasoning from a social justice-obsessed newspaper. It was also imaginative dot-connecting to invite readers to infer anti-Semitism from a monologue about the British Constitution. But there you go. It appears anti-Semitism nowadays, like sexism, misogyny, transphobia and far-right politics, is in the eye of the beholder. Here's the thing. As I said at the top, ugliness, unspeakable ugliness, has slithered into our public discourse like sewage from a burst pipe. It's been no accident, rather a deliberate campaign based upon application of the oldest and most childish tactic in the book, that of baseless name-calling, to shore up the defences around official narratives that are collapsing like sand castles in the face of an incoming tide. In the process, once important and precisely descriptive words have been utterly compromised until they mean everything and also nothing. After all, if everyone is a right-wing misogynist anti-Semite, then no one is. Just as they tried to distract us from the erosion of our liberties right under our noses by fear porn and nudge units, their lockdowns, face masks, forever war and climate crisis, so we are losing sight of real crimes of violence against women, abuse and discrimination on the grounds of race and the persecution of ancient faith and culture. The truth is that we are over this now. We've had a gutful. We've seen the attempted manipulation, the wordplay and the rest, and we're not fooled for a moment. Words matter at the deepest level of our relationships with one another. Our language is what makes us human and makes possible our society and civilization. We must reclaim the words, like everything else, and keep talking sense to one another. And at the end of the day, if we must be back in the playground, again, there's this. Sticks and stones may break our bones, but names will never hurt us.